What's up, guys? It's Dr. Murphy. Today's date is April 15th, 2021. We are excited today to present to you some interesting history into prophylaxis medications. What's a prophylactic medication? Well, stay tuned. You're going to learn all about the history of preventing a disease before it gets you.
New data showing the company's antibody drug for COVID can actually prevent the disease in housemates of people who have COVID-19. Len, thanks for being with us this morning. We understand you're taking these data to the FDA to try to expand the indication for this drug under EUA. Tell us how a prevention drug like this might help at this stage in the pandemic.
Right. So thanks, Meg, for having us on. We should take a step back before we dive too deeply into the data and just remember that we've got a war going on, literally. We're trying to win this war through vaccination, and that's probably our strongest weapon. But unfortunately, this war is far from over. There's 70,000 Americans every day who are still getting sick with the virus. And we need to have other weapons besides the vaccine to be able to deal with this pandemic. And our cocktail, REGEN-COV, really has shown some striking data. A while back, we've shown that you can actually, if you have the disease, if you have COVID and you're an outpatient and you're at risk, we can decrease the number of people who get hospitalized or die by 70% by treating these appropriate patients early. Today's data, we've now taken that step even one step further.
Find a way to use this medication
to treat people before they're infected, and we can show you can block 80% of infections in people who are at risk
antibodies
to
like
be
this
infected with
are
the
where
virus.
we're going.
The advantage of this cocktail is that it immediately, almost within the first few days, you'll start to get protection from becoming infected. So you could, in a ring, if you will, take all the contacts of somebody who's infected. And very importantly, this cocktail is active against all the worrisome variants that are circulating now. So if you want to put a stop to these variants, you could use this cocktail in a ring vaccination kind of approach. You know, I think the pieces of the puzzle are starting to come together. There's vaccine hesitancy. There's also been some drug hesitancy. But now, if you think about it, we've got the NIH has strongly endorsed last week the REGEN-COV cocktail. The FDA has authorized it for appropriate outpatients. There is ample supply. The drug is free to patients. And most importantly, there's overwhelming data. So this puzzle, which was a little bit hard to see, is pretty clear to us right now. And I think it should be clear to most people that there is an approach in addition, not instead of, but in addition to vaccination, where we can treat people who are at risk to get the disease. That has to be authorized by the FDA. Actually, right now, we can treat people who are getting the disease every day and keep them out of the hospital.
All right, guys, so I want to get into this briefly, but I want to take a couple of seconds and I want you to pay attention. The video I just showed you, although I should have made it a lot bigger, sorry about that. The video that I just showed you is on CNBC. I don't know if you guys know what CNBC is, but it's basically a news channel like CNN, all day long news, except the news that they have is news about business. These are business leaders like Dr. Scott Gottlieb or, the CEO of Regeneron presenting data about their company and why you should invest in their company, Breaking news always comes out in the business world first because they move first. They invest first based on signs, based on insider data, based on expert knowledge, so they can move money around and make more money from their money. And so on CNBC, you can get some of the opinions from key thought leaders as well as from corporate CEOs themselves. So today on Murphy's Medical Minute, we are talking about the Regeneron REGEN-COV antibody. But first, a little bit of history on influenza. Let's get to it here right now as we speak. That's right, today. Keys to the exit. Get me on the off-ramp from this crazy COVID pandemic. Get me on the off-ramp for this crazy COVID pandemic. We don't want to deal with any more of this pandemic stuff. So how do we get off? I'll do whatever it takes. I'll do whatever it takes. And then probably one of the biggest problems we have with pandemics is that people say, I'll do whatever it takes to get off. What do you want? Oh, I'll take a vaccine. Oh, that's not going to work. Oh, I'll wear a mask. That's not going to work. Oh, stand on your head upside down. It's like trying to get rid of the hiccups, except people get really desperate. People get really desperate. And when we have desperation, we tend to overcall keys to the exit. Keys to the exit today, Regeneron versus reality. So who's this podcast for today? Who's this YouTube live stream for today? It's for people exposed to COVID. You live in a household with someone with COVID. Oh my God. I just told a patient today how we're going to have to handle the isolation of the patient with COVID. What happens when it's a kid and how well are they going to isolate? Who's going to take care of them? Who's going to be the parent that exposes themselves to the sickness? More importantly, what happens if you're in an apartment complex? What happens if you're in an office building all day long with this person? The big problem here is asymptomatic spreaders. People don't even know that they're spreading COVID. An even bigger problem is the super spreaders, which are about 20% of people are responsible for 80% of all spreading. That's the Pareto principle, classic. So what's our solution? Simple. One shot and variant coverage. You heard the CEO of Regeneron. The polyclonal cocktail known as REGEN-COV has been FDA, EUA approved for treatment of novel coronavirus. Now, it's very important to note that the polyclonal, this cocktail, tends to work better for the variants and in the tri-state area. Now, listen, Regeneron's right off of the Tappan Zee Bridge. Regeneron's right off of the Tappan Zee Bridge. It's in Terrytown. So in the tri-state area, we are using polyclonal antibodies. Why? Because of B.1.526 with the E484K variant. So we're going to go over that today. This is another piece to the COVID exit strategy. But we have to be careful as this falls into the place. We need to make sure CNBC doesn't shove a puzzle piece that doesn't belong. So I want to give you some history. And in this case, it's the Tamiflu tale. Who did this matter for? Everyone who's been exposed to the flu and taken Tamiflu. Have you taken Tamiflu? I have. Hi, I took the Tamiflu. Who remembers the H1N1 pandemic? Hi, I remember the H1N1 pandemic. The solution was to hoard oseltamivir. Well, oseltamivir was approved in 1999. And it wasn't until 2014 till the truth came out. What? That's right. It took 15 years before the truth of this medication really came out. It was studied for decades. Before, the H1N1 epidemic. So we had 10 years of this medication before it was used for the H1N1 epidemic. And it took another 5 years after that for the truth to come out. Okay, so the important thing to remember about this is that Roche made this medication. They sponsored a bunch of studies. We can see here from 1999 to 2012, we had development and data on all of this. As an anti-flu medication, the World Health Organization said, listen, H1N1 pandemic coming on, stockpile Tamiflu. And in 2010, India approved oseltamivir for children 6 to 12 months of age. Pandemics make you do crazy things. And I think what's important about all this is we're really going to remember that the people exposed to flu were kids. We know that influenza spreads because of school spread. Sick people at work spread. We had a pandemic, an H1N1 problem, and so the solution was Tamiflu. Unfortunately, we had some overhyped benefits. And so before we really rush to judge REGEN-COV for prophylaxis, we have to remember that the Tamiflu fiasco still looms to this day. You don't know about the Tamiflu fiasco? Let me tell you the tale of Tamiflu. So in the 1990s, Roche sponsored about 40 clinical trials on this medication to prove that it worked. And in 2000, there was a study published in JAMA which said that healthy patients with early treatment within the first 36 hours of the illness cut your severity of symptoms, cut your duration of disease by a third, and cut your severity of symptoms by 40%. In addition, it also reduced the complications. So Roche and the American Medical Association, Journal of the American Medical Association, were okay with the conjecture that it prevented, post-influenza pneumonia. We didn't have any data for that, but that's what was published. JAMA allowed the author to conjecture that that would be the case. So these were multiple studies, all funded by Roche, with lack of independent data. So, what happened? Well, when the first Cochrane Review came in 2009, they said everything looked great. And it took Japanese scientists to stand up and scream, "We need another review. We need another review." The Japanese, when they were giving their kids Tamiflu, they found major neuropsychiatric events. Suicidality, paranoia, hallucinations, delusions. It was insane the amount of side effects that were out there. Seen by who? Private practice clinicians. Physicians were reporting these problems and complications. Unfortunately, none of the scientific data reported it. So Cochrane comes in 2014, and the Cochrane Review finds that the side effects were present in the old studies. They were just not published. What? That's right. Their side effects were hidden. In addition to that, there was lack of follow-up of patients post-Tamiflu. One of the things that the clinicians will tell you is that these side effects happened after they were off of the prophylactic Tamiflu. After they were off of the prophylactic Tamiflu, after they were off of the treatment for Tamiflu. And no one really followed up the studies. So Cochrane says, wait a second, why weren't these thoroughly analyzed post-treatment? And this is the problem with press release science. And even back then in 2009, we had a pandemic. So everyone was trying to find a key to the exit. Everyone was freaked out. You can imagine, this is our second one of these big pandemic issues that let the world on fire, set the world on fire. So press release science chicanery can happen, but science chicanery can happen too. And we need to remember that CNBC doesn't help analyze the science. So what did they find? They found the following. The adverse effect profile had been conveniently concealed. No mention of the adverse drugs were published in any of the trials. No mention of the adverse effects, especially the neuropsychiatric effects. The post-marketing surveillance had uncovered all sorts of things that the pharmaceutical company did not share. They did not share that in the post-marketing analysis with any of the physicians that we were getting marketed to. The FDA didn't push this out. There's a lot of stuff that was not put out there. Adverse effects, liver enzyme issues, cardiac arrhythmias, long QT syndrome, some really bad stuff like toxic epidermal necrolysis and Stevens-Johnson syndrome, but more importantly were the neuropsychiatric events. Depression, panic attacks, suicidal ideation, delusions, delirium. Some kids had encephalitis, and most frequently these symptoms affected our children. These symptoms affected our children. So, unfortunately, these were hidden. These were hidden from the press. These were hidden from physicians prescribing. It wasn't until 2014 until the data started to come out. And what else did they find? They found that the benefits were pretty paltry. Cochrane Review failed to establish any definitive benefit in patients with asthma. In addition, the data that was initially conjectured back in 2000 in the JAMA article that pneumonia and hospitalizations would be cut with this medication failed to establish true data science. It was not statistically significant. There are a bunch of chicanery going on. A bunch of chicanery going on. What does that mean? What does that mean? I got to tell you, this is probably one of the most succinct conclusions that I've seen in a while. A cocktail of pandemic panic, publicity, propaganda, and scientific misconduct turned a new medication with only modest efficacy into a blockbuster. What you don't know is that there were billions of dollars of Tamiflu stockpiled in 2009. If you don't remember it, there was Tamiflu shortages everywhere. I remember I ordered Tamiflu back in 2009. Why do I remember this? This is right after I got out of training at Yale. I left Yale at the end of 2008 and opened my practice in 2009. We were buying massive amounts of Tamiflu from Cardinal, from Shine, from McKesson. I was a young doc. I was just following orders. That's right. I was following what the World Health Organization said, which was stockpile Tamiflu. Why? Because the data seemed to indicate that this was going to be a lifesaver. Well, 5 years later, they found out it really wasn't. Reality must take precedence over public relations, as nature cannot be fooled. And there's no other way to put it out there. What happened was an obfuscation of the data, hiding the neurologic symptoms. And I'll tell you, to this date, there is no way in the world I would give a kid Tamiflu unless they were, very sick in the first 36 hours. No way. No way. And what I found interesting was there were a lot of doctors back then, I remember older doctors, who were not so keen on Tamiflu. And I couldn't understand why. Fast forward 11 years, and I can see why those same doctors, and maybe even myself, are not so keen on the newer treatments. We want to make sure that they have enough time of a run-in and post-marketing surveillance to be effective. Because our first guide as physicians is to not harm. Primum non nocere. And so one of the best solutions I think we need to have is we need to let physicians and scientists debate freely. Never more so is this important than on things like hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. That's the Tamiflu tale. Roche made a med. They unilaterally funded all the studies for the med. They got it approved. And then in post-marketing analysis, they buried the side effects. They didn't list the side effects in their other data. Even though it was noted, they did not publish it. Then they tricked the world into buying Tamiflu and hoarding it for the H1N1 pandemic. That's right. Hoarded the medication. Billions of dollars went into the coffers of Roche. And it took Cochrane and independent physicians from Japan to demand a Cochrane re-review to uncover the chicanery. So color me a little jaded when I see pharmaceutical companies on CNBC saying, it's a free medication for everyone. We'll give it to everyone. Injections in everyone. Come on, man. Come on. So what is REGEN-COV? REGEN-COV is a cocktail of antibodies, casirivimab and indivimab, which are antibodies which bind the SARS-CoV-2 virus, preventing entry into cells. The FDA EUA has been approved for infected patients at high risk, very similar to the monoclonal antibody BAM-BAM from Eli Lilly. BAM-BAM is falling out of favor with the variants because the polyclonal antibody seems to cover the escape mechanisms that we've seen with the variants and a monoclonal antibody. Enter the prophylaxis studies. Now, prophylaxis studies started in 2020 for REGEN-COV. And in fact, we have evidence from monkeys and hamsters, in regards to prophylaxis for this medication. So, in the end, we have science by press release yet again. April 12th, just a couple of days ago, we had a prevention trial showing listen, when you reveal and look at these, when you look at the antibodies, when you look at the prevention here, we see a massive, massive, massive prevention of infections, right? That's what it looks like. 81% reduced risk. Holy cow. All right. 81% reduced risk. First week, 72%. Subsequent weeks, 93% reduction. Just like Whitesnake, it's not just a band. Here we go again. So what is the real household exposed risk? You know, we had an initial study that showed a 50% attack rate. So what do we need? We need more data. We need more lies, damn lies, and statistics. In this case, we need a meta-analysis of 54 exposure attack rate studies revealing the true attack rate to be around 16%. And how many of those 16% are your high-risk patients? The obese, the chronically ill. That's what we need to know. CNBC is not going to give you that. So here's what we find in the REGEN-COV study. Transmission 7.8% in placebo. So it's even less than the meta-analyses, not 58% like the initial Tennessee studies. In addition, REGEN-COV had a absolute risk reduction of 6.3%, from 7.8% in placebo to 1.5% in REGEN-COV. Not a 93% reduction. So be careful. Good press, but it's not peer-reviewed yet, so caveat emptor. Also, what about the adverse events? Well, I'm here to tell you, I always look for adverse events, especially after the Tamiflu issue. And in this case, what do we have? 2 deaths in placebo, 2 deaths in the treated. Doesn't seem to be a statistical difference. And they didn't attribute those deaths to REGEN-COV. There were serious events. 1 in 5 people that got REGEN-COV had a serious event. 1 in 5 people with REGEN-COV had a serious event. 1 in 3 people, 29% roughly, in placebo had a serious event. So, here we are again. In this case, with REGEN-COV, with something we desperately need, which is a prophylactic medication. It's a prophylactic medication. And who is REGEN-COV collaborating with? ROCHE. Regeneron is collaborating with ROCHE, makers of Tamiflu. That's right. Didn't I just tell you about ROCHE and the chicanery that happened? Well, don't worry. ROCHE is going to be primarily responsible for the development and distribution outside of the U.S. And I'm hopeful that ROCHE learned their lesson. Color me jaded, but I'm hopeful that we can allow scientific debate about these medications free of politics. Very similar to what I think should be happening with ivermectin. We better learn our lesson here, otherwise we're going to be doomed to make the same mistake, which is we're going to rush for one of the keys for the way out. In this case, key number 1, prophylaxis of infection. Patients are exhausted. They don't trust the governments. They don't trust the politicians. They don't trust the pharmaceutical companies, and they don't trust CNBC, but they desperately need a way out. And so prophylactic medications really is one of my keys to normalcy. It's one of my keys to normalcy. Regeneron is applying for the EUA for the antibody cocktails for prophylaxis with REGEN-COV, but I've got some big questions. Is insurance going to pay for this? The guy on there just said, hey, it's free to everyone. Really? Let me tell you about free. Insurance says they're supposed to, the CARES Act says they're supposed to pay for all this stuff. They're stiffing me left and right. I've had to sue insurance companies to get payments. So the question is, will insurance pay for this? Secondly, will anyone qualify? Are they going to be able to do what he says and ring vaccinate everyone around someone who has COVID? How quick do we need to test and treat? There's a lot of questions out here for REGEN-COV. A lot of questions. And I sure hope and pray that the FDA will dig through this aggressively. They're going to need to dig through it before they start throwing these antibody cocktails out there for everyone. Okay, they can't just start throwing out the antibody cocktails. I don't know what else to say, but I'll tell you this. I'll tell you this right now. Put simply, super quick. We need a prophylactic medication to escape the pandemic. We need a prophylactic medication. We need an abortive medication. We need early treatment. We need ventilation strategies to be able to keep people from getting infected. And we need vaccinations. The one thing I agree with that he said, and old Meg Tyrrell with CNBC, we need more than just vaccination to fight this war. That's number one. Number two, this war is far from over. It is far from over. And I've just begun to fight. That's right. REGEN-COV 2 could be Tamiflu. It could be Xofluza, or it could just be REGEN-COV. I'm hopeful that the FDA will remember what happened with Tamiflu. I'm hopeful that we allow private practice doctors and independent physicians and scientists to voice their opinions. The last place we need to silence dissent is in the scientific halls of academia and in the halls of a hospital. Independent debate is the way to find the truth. Because we're not going to learn it from CNBC, and we sure as hell are not going to learn it from the pharmaceutical companies sproiking their medications. Today's date is April 15, 2021. I'm proud to present the Tamiflu tale and REGEN-COV. I hope you learned a little bit today. Stay tuned. Tomorrow we got more stuff coming up. I'm looking forward to the puzzle pieces finally fitting in place. Oh, and I forgot. My headaches are gone. My headaches are gone. Thank goodness. Normal platelets and headache free. This is Dr. Murphy Medical Associates. In the Northeast, it's raining out today. But if you're anywhere else, you need to get outside in the sun. Sun is a natural antiseptic. The UV light helps destroy bacteria. Sun helps us convert vitamin D so our immune systems can stay safe and strong. That's right. We are made to be well. We need to be one with nature and get outside. Get the heck outside. Buildings are natural. Sun is natural. Anyways, this is Dr. Murphy Medical Associates and our team at coronatestct.com. Another puzzle piece slowly fitting in. Is it real? Or are we going to have the football pulled out from us like Lucy does to Charlie? Take care of each other, do your best, and be good to each other. You just watched Murphy's Medical Minute.